Yeah. Yeah.
Don't I get green to be there?
Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks as legislators for the rich diversity of our history. We welcome the many challenges of the present. We dedicate ourselves to both the present and the future as we join in the service of Alberta and Canada. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to present a petition signed by 230 residents of Alberta representing 20 voluntary agencies. These citizens, Mr. Speaker, request that the Assembly urge the government to establish a task force to call for and examine submissions regarding the effects of the Volunteer and Corporations Act on non-profit organizations in this province. Petitions are still coming in, Mr. Speaker, so we will likely be presenting the same position in the future.
Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Member for Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 52, I wish to table the annual report of the Standing Committee on the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Act. Copies of this report will be delivered to each member.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 201 for first reading. Bill 201 is the Freedom of Information and Personal Privacy Act. This bill would provide any person under certain conditions with access to any record by the Alberta government. Also, one of the members of the Human Rights Commission is designated a privacy commissioner and charged with the expeditious handling of any complaints from persons who feel they are not fairly treated under the Act.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn has moved for first reading Bill 201, Freedom of Information and Personal Privacy Act. Those members wishing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion is carried.
Bill number 201, Freedom of Information and Personal Privacy Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Pashak, is now read a first time.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon, it caught the eye of the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 229, the Party Leadership Finances Act. This bill amends the present election finances Contributions Disclosure Act, perfects it, Mr. Speaker, to require that contributions to party leadership candidates be disclosed, would set a limit on the amount of these contributions, but would not make these contributions tax deductible as now is the case for other type of contributions.
There it is.
Yeah. The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon has moved for first reading Bill 226, not 229, 226, Party Leadership Finances Act.
Aye, Mr. Speaker.
I believe we'll find orders of the day. It won't pass. 226.
Speaker, I thought it was the size of the contribution there.
The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon has moved for first reading Bill 226, Party Leadership Finances Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill 226, the Party Leadership Finances Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Taylor, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleague, the honourable member for Edmonton Glengarry, I'd like to beg leave to introduce Bill 202, the School User Fees Elimination Act. Mr. Speaker, if this bill is passed, it would amend the School Act to strike out all those provisions within the current Act which allow school boards to levy fees and charges for textbooks, supplies, certain sorts of tuition, field trips, and special courses. As a consequence, Mr. Speaker, any user fees in the schools would be done away with.
The honourable member for Edmonton Belmont has moved on behalf of the member for Edmonton Glengarry for first reading Bill 202, School User Fees Elimination Act. Those members wishing to agree to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 202, School User Fees Elimination Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Sigurdsson, is now read a first time.
The chair would like to interject for half a moment. Perhaps, while 5BX is good for all of us, that we might move through votes and proceedings, and we'll go up in numerical order because there's such a considerable number of bills to be introduced for first reading. The chair would then recognize the member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, I move for leave to introduce a bill entitled Quality Child Daycare Standards Amendment Act. Mr. Speaker, the title of the bill is self-explanatory, but of particular note is the reference in it to educational standards for daycare workers.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona has moved for first reading Bill 203, Quality Child Daycare Standards Amendment Act. Those members wishing to agree to first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 203, Quality Child Daycare Standards Amendment Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Wright, is now read a first time.
Cypress Redcliffe.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 204, Farm Vendor Financing Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill will propose to expand the financing alternatives available to farmers by guaranteeing vendor-financed mortgages.
The honourable member for Cypress Redcliffe has moved for first reading Bill 204, Farmland Vendor Financing Act. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 204, Farmland Vendor Financing Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Highland, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to beg leave for first reading Bill 205, Alberta Economic Council Act. Mr. Speaker, if passed, this bill would establish an Alberta Economic Council of some 30 members drawn from groups representing various sectors of the population. Its principal duty, Mr. Speaker, would be to advise and recommend to the government strategies and policies by which Alberta can achieve the highest possible levels of employment.
The honourable member for Edmonton Belmont has moved for first reading Bill 205, Alberta Economic Council Act. Those members in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 205, Alberta Economic Council Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Sigurdsson, is now read a first time.
Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill number 206, the Alberta Family Institute Act. The intent of this institution, Mr. Speaker, is to reinforce the family unit here in Alberta.
The honourable member for Red Deer South has moved for first reading Bill 206, Alberta Family Institute Act. Those members in favour, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 206, the Alberta Family Institute Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Millwoods.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request leave to introduce Bill number 207, being the Alberta Plus Corporation Act. Mr. Speaker, if this bill is passed, it will provide a mechanism, the Alberta Plus Corporation, to ensure that major developments of provincial resources go ahead with full and maximum benefit to the people of Alberta.
The honourable member for Edmonton Millwoods has moved first reading of Bill 207, Alberta Plus Corporation Act. Those members in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 207, Alberta Plus Corporation Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Gibault, is now read a first time.
Now, honourable member for Bow Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 208, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act. Mr. Speaker, if this were passed, it would have municipalities do an annual assessment on property at current market value.
The honourable member for Bow Valley has moved first reading of Bill 208, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act. Those members in favour, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 208, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Musgrove, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 209, the Loan and Trust Corporation Conflict of Interest Act. This act would regulate conflict of interest and self-dealing in Alberta's financial industry.
The honourable member for Edmonton Meadowlark has moved first reading of Bill 209, Loan and Trust Corporation Conflict of Interest Act. Those members in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 209, Loan and Trust Corporation Conflict of Interest Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Mitchell, is now read a first time.
Member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce Bill 210, the Midwinter Holiday Act, for first reading. Mr. Speaker, this act would establish a new statutory holiday in the third Friday in February, based on our recent Olympic experience, showing us just how much fun we can have in February, and recognizing also that a well-rested and healthy workforce is a productive workforce. I propose this bill to help beat the blues and dissipate the doldrums of a long midwinter.
One would hope we could have fun every day. The honourable member for Vegreville has moved first reading of Bill 210, Midwinter Holiday Act. Those in favour of the motion for first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 210, Midwinter Holiday Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Fox, is now read a first time.
Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill 211, the Children's Access Right Enforcement Act. Mr. Speaker, nothing is perhaps more tragic than to realize that children of broken marriages having difficulties having access to both parents. The purpose of this bill, Mr. Speaker, would be to provide, where the court has ordered access rights be given to the non-custodial parent, the steps would be taken to see indeed that those rights were enforced.
The honourable member for Lethbridge West has moved first reading to Bill 211, Children's Access Rights Enforcement Act. Those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 211, Children's Access Rights Enforcement Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Gogo, is now read a first time.
Honourable member for Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 212, an act to amend the Emblems of Alberta Act. Mr. Speaker, This bill, if passed, would designate the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep as the official mammal of Alberta.
The honourable member for Lacombe has moved first reading of Bill 212, an act to amend the Emblems of Alberta Act. Those members in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 212, an act to amend the Emblems of Alberta Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Moore, is now read a first time.
Member for Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce on behalf of my colleague, the honourable member for Edmonton-Avonmore, Bill 213, the Midwinter Holiday Name Act. This bill sets out the procedures for the holding of a contest among Albertans to choose a name for the new holiday created by the Midwinter Holiday Act.
The honourable member for Vegreville has moved on behalf of the member for Edmonton-Avonmore Bill 213 for first reading, Midwinter Holiday Name Act. Those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion is carried.
Bill number 213, Midwinter Holiday Name Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Fox, is now read a first time.
Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill number 215, being an act to amend the Mortgage Brokers Regulation Act. The bill would simply strike out the clause in Section 2 of the Mortgage Brokers Regulation Act, which exempts members of the Law Society of Alberta from those provisions of the Act regulating the vending of mortgages.
The honourable member for Edmonton Kingsway has moved first reading to Bill 215, an act to amend the Mortgage Brokers Regulation Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 215, an act to amend the Mortgage Brokers Regulation Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. McEachern, is now read a first time.
Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, number 216, an act to amend the Jury Act. This act would allow for consideration by a court to compensate jurors who may suffer considerable loss of income by fulfilling his or her obligation and desires to participate in our judicial system when required or requested to do so.
The honourable member for Calgary-McCall has moved first reading to Bill 216, an act to amend the Jury Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 216, an act to amend the Jury Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time.
Member for Calgary Northwest.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 217, an act to amend the Hospital Act, which proposes that a hospital district be established in any area with 2 or more hospitals.
The honourable member for Calgary Northwest has moved first reading to Bill 217, an act to amend the Hospitals Act. Those members wishing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 217, an act to amend the Hospitals Act, introduced by the honourable member Dr. Casson, is now read a first time.
The honourable member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 219, an act to amend the Land Titles Act. The bill would require every person owning land in Alberta to declare by July 1st, 1989, whether or not they are a Canadian citizen or whether or not they live in Alberta or Canada or elsewhere. And the Register of Land Title would file an annual report with the Assembly regarding foreign ownership of Alberta land.
The honourable member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche has moved for first reading Bill 219, an act to amend the Land Titles Act. Those members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 219, an act to amend the Land Titles Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Piquette, is now read a first time.
Member for Calgary-Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill 220, an act to amend the Insurance Act, This bill will amend Chapter 1 to 5 of the Revised Statutes of Alberta 1980. A new section will forbid the use of age and sex as determinants for insurance premiums and establish those factors which may be considered in a schedule of rates filed with the Alberta Automobile Insurance Board.
The honourable member for Calgary-Glenmore has moved first reading of Bill 220, an act to amend the Insurance Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 220, an act to amend the Insurance Act, introduced by the honourable member Mrs. Myrosh, is now read a first time.
The honourable member for Athabasca-Lac-La Biche.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the honourable member for Edmonton-Calder, I request leave to introduce Bill 223, the Disabled Parking Act. The bill requires every operator of a parking lot to set aside a number of stalls for use by disabled individuals and make it an offence for a person who is not disabled to park in them.
The honourable member for Athabasca-Lac-La Biche has moved on behalf of the member for Edmonton-Calder first reading of Bill 223, Disabled Parking Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 223, Disabled Parking Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Piquet, is now read a first time.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 222, an act to amend the Labour Relations Act. This bill would repeal the section of the Labour Relations Act which presently prohibits hospital employees from striking. The bill also sets out rules whereby some of those employees governed by a collective agreement could be subject to an essential service designation as established in the collective agreement.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar has moved first reading of Bill 222. Those in favour of first reading of this act, an act to amend the Labour Relations Act, please signify by saying yes. Those opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 222, an act to amend the Labour Relations Act, introduced by the honourable member Mrs. Hughes, is now read a first time.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce a bill being the Retail Business Holidays Act. Mr. Speaker, this is an act to require most commercial enterprises with a sales and display area of greater than 220 square meters to be closed on statutory holidays, including Sundays. The bill provides for a series of exemptions, principally in the tourism and personal services trade. Mr. Speaker, as well, the bill provides for a business to remain open on a Sunday if it is closed the immediately preceding Saturday.
The honourable member for Calgary Mountain View has moved for first reading Bill 225, Retail Business Holidays Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 225, Retail Business Holidays Act, introduced by honourable member Mr. Hawksworth, is now read a first time.
Honourable member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce Bill number 4, the Energy Resources Conservation Amendment Act 1988. This bill adjusts the timing of installment payments from the Treasurer to the ERCB and provides for records retention consistent with practices in other governmental agencies and provides a mechanism for enforcement of local interveners' costs.
The honourable member for Red Deer South has moved for first reading Bill number 4, Energy Resources Conservation Amendment Act 1988. Those willing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 4, Energy Resources Conservation Amendment Act 1988, introduced by honourable member Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time.
Honourable member for Wainwright.
It is my pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to introduce Bill number 3, the Agriculture Statutes Amendment Act 1988. This bill includes minor changes to the Livestock and Livestock Products Act, as well as the Dairy Board Act.
The honourable member for Wainwright has moved for first reading Bill number 3, Agriculture Statutes Amendment Act 1988. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 3, Agriculture Statutes Amendment Act 1988, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Fisher, is now read a first time.
The honourable member for Dunvegan.
I request leave to introduce Bill number 2, Homestead Lease Loan Repeal Act.
The honourable member for Dunvegan has moved first reading to Bill number 2, Homestead Lease Loan Repeal Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 2, Homestead Lease Loan Repeal Act, introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Clegg, is now read a first time.
Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I would move that bills number 2, 3, and 4 be placed on the order paper under Government Bills in Order for second reading.
Those in favour of the motion as made by the Government House Leader, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Tabling returns and reports.
Provincial Treasurer.
I'd like to file with the Legislative Assembly the public accounts of the province of Alberta for the year ended March 31st, 1987. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, I would file the copy of the annual report of the Department of Alberta Treasury for the same fiscal year end.
Attorney General.
Speaker, I beg leave to table the 1987 annual report of the Legal Aid Society of Alberta.
Member for Calgary North Hill.
Pursuant to Section 18.1 of the Auditor General Act, I beg leave to table the annual report of the Auditor General for the year 1986-87. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the report of the Chief Electoral Officer on the Chinook by-election held on Monday, May 23rd, 1987. Copies of both of these reports have been distributed to all members, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to table the annual report of the Alberta Cultural Heritage Foundation, the year ending March 31, 1987.
I am pleased to table the following reports. Number 1, pursuant to Section 19, subsection 5 of the Legislative Assembly Act, Members' Services Orders 1 through to 6, 1988. And secondly, pursuant to Standing Order 110, the annual report of Alberta Hansard. And 3, pursuant to the Election Finances and Contributions Disclosure Act, the annual report of the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer.
Introduction of special guests.
Minister of Municipal Affairs, followed by the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased today to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly some very special people situated in your gallery. These are 6 students who are winners of the essay and poster contest held during Municipal Involvement Week in 1987, and their parents, grandparents, and friends who accompany them. They were asked to write essays or do posters on the topic of telling us why their council is important to them and have contributed much by fulfilling that responsibility. I'd ask them to stand as I read their names in the gallery. First, Kim Vandermeer and Mr. and Mrs. Vandermeer, her parents, and her brother Darren. Randy Coots from Slave Lake. Colby Livers, his mother, Mrs. Livers, from Beaver Lodge. Melissa Thorson, her mother and grandparents, and Mr. and Mrs. Enders of Wembley, Alberta. Betty Unraw and her father, Mr. Unraw, from Lacrete, Alberta, and Gwen Elas from Lacrete, Alberta, accompanied by her father, Mr. Elas. I'd ask them now to all stand and receive the thanks of this Assembly for their contribution and a warm welcome here today.
Minister of Public Works Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature 28 grade 10 students from the Assumption School in the town of Grand Center. They're accompanied today by their social studies teacher, Mr. Seb Stein, two parents, Romeo Lefebvre and Guy David, both of the town of Cold Lake, and bus driver Ray Palecta. They're seated in the members' gallery, and I'd ask that they stand and receive the welcome of the House.
Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to make two introductions to you and the members this afternoon. First, I'd like to introduce some 26 grade 6 students from Satu School in the constituency of Edmonton Mill Woods. They're seated in the members' gallery, accompanied by their teacher, David Fairfield, and parents, Mrs. Jan Cohen, Mrs. Kathy Hnetsiak, as well as Miss Angela Williams. I'd ask them to please stand and receive the very warm welcome of the members. Speaker, seated in the public gallery, there are 55 students accompanied with their teachers from Mayokamam Elementary School from the grade 6 class. They're accompanied by Mr. Eldon Wyman, Mrs. Wendy Truk, and Mr. Vladashenko, the assistant principal of the school. I'd ask them to please stand and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, on last Thursday, the Deputy Premier indicated that the so-called universality in programs is going to be targeted. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, we asked the Deputy Premier, he's a little more subdued, and we're not sure what he means now, Mr. Speaker. So what we want to do is ask the Premier, Mr. Speaker, to take this opportunity to clear up the confusion and indicate whether the Deputy Minister was reflecting government policy when he said, and I quote, "We'll be getting away from the universal aspect that has so long been attached to social programs."
Mr. Speaker, I reviewed Hansard when this matter was discussed on Friday, and I thought the Deputy Premier answered it very clearly.
Mr. Speaker, you're probably the only one in Alberta that believes that, but that doesn't surprise me for this government, Mr. Speaker. My question to this Premier, because this statement was made, and many Albertans are concerned, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier indicate which social programs have been targeted by this government?
That also was discussed on Friday, Mr. Speaker, and again answered by the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is what we expect from this government. They make a statement outside, and then they will not come back in the House, Mr. Speaker.
Accountability.
No accountability.
Now, Mr. Speaker, we went back and saw this beautiful document from the Progressive Conservative Party, you know, the New Right Republicanism. My question, Mr. Speaker, flowing from that, where they talk about priorities for government services and programs should be established on the basis of responding to the greatest needs and should take into consideration the financial circumstances of the individuals affected. Would the Premier confirm what they mean is that there will be spending cuts in social programs which will hurt average and middle income people? Is this not the new agenda of this government, Mr. Speaker?
That will not happen, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to this Premier. Would he explain then what his government, it has his name on it, what they mean by that statement? And the fact, will he also explain what we mean when the Deputy Premier says we're moving away from universality? Explain what it's meant to the people in this Assembly, Mr. Speaker.
We like him. Mr. Speaker, as the Deputy Premier said on Friday, the paper will be introduced in the House and all members will have a chance to express their views on it.
Supplementary, Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, surely the Premier must notice that all the cut and fill and the changing of opinions that go on over there, and the attack often made on the universality of programs, that the public's concerned. And to say that they're going to table it is not a good enough answer, Mr. Speaker. When will that bill be tabled? When will it be tabled?
First of all, it's not a bill, Mr. Speaker. It's a paper, and that document will be tabled at the appropriate time.
Supplementary. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, maybe we can get some more answers because this has already happened. The government, in a time of restraint, recently stunned Albertans by announcing that they were prepared to advance $12 million in cash to that great free enterpriser, Peter Pocklington, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, the government announced it will authorize further loan guarantees, Mr. Speaker, of another $55 million. This is only the taxpayers taking the risk, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
My question to the Premier is why did this so-called free enterprise government give this so-called free enterpriser this taxpayer's generosity?
Let's hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a matter that's handled by the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, not asking to respond.
Honourable Minister, please.
Mr. Speaker, the importance to the provincial economy of improving our capability of value-adding and food processing is well known, particularly to our primary producers and also to most members of the Assembly. In providing support to companies in Alberta, including Gainers and others like Cargill, XL, Fletcher's, and others, it is a continuation of the government's recognition of the importance of being able to market our food products in a processed form throughout North America and the Pacific Rim. The loan guarantee and the loan which will be provided to Gainers over a period of 3 years is consistent with that policy, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Isn't this an interesting version of free enterprise in Alberta?
Yeah.
The rich and the powerful get loan guarantees, and we have cutbacks in education and the rest of the things, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister then of Economic Development, I'd love to have that $55 million where the taxpayers take all the risk, and if any profits are made, then the person like Mr. Pocklington will get it. My question is, what specific guarantees and detailed performance guarantees has the government demanded that they will in fact create jobs? Is it just across the board, do what you want with it, or are there specific guarantees, Mr. Speaker?
No, it's this.
Mr. Speaker, we would welcome an application from the honourable member to process agricultural products, and we're prepared to consider them.
You can't sell BS.
What was the second part of the question?
Order, please. Honourable Minister, we'll have it with the next supplementary question. Leader of the Opposition.
Mr.
Yes, the agreement is a very rigid agreement that involves an undertaking by Gainers to build a new hog processing plant in southern Alberta and to expand and upgrade the beef processing plant in northern Alberta. Many producers have spoken both to the Minister of Agriculture, the Associate Minister, and other MLAs with respect to the importance of having that capacity to process our beef in northern Alberta, as well as increased capacity to process pork in southern Alberta. These are the two main expansion areas that were included in the agreement with Gainers.
Mr. Speaker, that's what they talked about. But would the minister not confirm that there are no performance guarantees?
Right.
There's absolutely no obligation for Mr. Pocklington to do this. We handed him $55 million in loan guarantees and said, do what you want.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, I've dealt with the question, and that isn't accurate. There is an undertaking to do both of those that I've described to members of the Assembly. Certain conditions, of course, have to be in place. One of them, which I've spoken of earlier, is the available hog supply must be here. There's no doubt in our mind that with our crow offset program and the consistently low prices that we've experienced, that there will be and has been an increase in hog production, and we would much sooner see those hogs processed in Alberta than moved live into the U.S. or into British Columbia.
Mr. Speaker.
That is hardly a condition.
Mr. Speaker, this is absolutely unbelievable. $55 million, away you go. Maybe if the hog market is there and you can make a profit, we'll get some of it back. My question is, because this is such a sweetheart deal to this minister, will he table this whole contract with Mr. Pocklington here in the Assembly so we can take a look at it?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, the choice of words of the Honourable Leader are unfortunate. It is not a sweetheart deal. It is a loan guarantee for which the taxpayers receive a fee, and the loan, the $12 million loan, which will be drawn down over 3 years, is at 9.6%, which is 0.6% higher than the loans that we're providing to farmers and to small businessmen. So I don't know where the honourable member is coming from with respect to it being a sweetheart deal.
Member for Little Bow, if we can get through the back chat, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
To the Minister of Economic Development, and it's with regards to the guidelines for this type of a loan or loan guarantee program. Can the Minister indicate what are the guidelines, and could the Minister as well table the guidelines for such a program so that other entrepreneurs in the province may have access to the same type of opportunity?
Mr. Speaker, in responding to the second question of the Leader of the Opposition, I had indicated that we have, on previous occasions, provided support to companies that are prepared to value add in Alberta. For example, in southern Alberta, XL Foods received a loan guarantee plus an interest deficiency guarantee over 5 years. In the case of Cargill, also in southern Alberta, there is an agreement to provide capital support for the development of a new project there. In the case of Fletcher's, we provided support to the farmers to pay off the loan, a portion of the loan on the purchase of the plant. Our programs respond to the specific requirements of a project, and each one is different, and we would respond in an appropriate way to those who plan to do things in Alberta and not just talk about it.
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, it is interesting to learn that there are no guidelines. But I'd like to go back to the Premier for the original, back as he answered the original question. In view of the sweetheart deal, the Premier must have been over a barrel. Was it by any chance any promise or agreement that he made when they settled a gain or strike for a loan or a guarantee?
What rubbish, Mr. Speaker. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you one guideline, and that is that this government is turning this economy around and diversifying the economy in this province, and the timid types like him, whether they like it or not, you haven't seen anything yet.
Supplementary, Vermilion Viking. Vermilion Viking, finally supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Provincial Treasurer. In a normal lending practice, there is always protection given to the monies by the lender. In this case, it would be the people of Alberta. Could you indicate what steps have been taken to protect their interests in a normal procedure, such as a loan or a loan guarantee?
Mr. Speaker, it is a matter of record, as the Minister of Economic Development has explained, that full covenant has been taken against all assets under the gainers or gainers property companies to ensure that A, we have proper security, and B, that in fact our charge against the property is one of the first, and finally that in fact we have a floating charge against all other assets that may be from time to time encumbered by our loan guarantee.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Dashawa pulp mill that is in process in the Peace River country seems to have been rushed through, Mr. Speaker, an almost unseemly rush. The environmental impact study was filed on December the 15th, and a scant 6 weeks later, the plant has its approval. And then yesterday we heard the Minister of Career Development, who was one of the departments that should have had input into whether the Dashawa plant was indeed cleared all the hurdles, and the Minister of Career Development said yes, he had worked on the consulting or on the permission part. My question is to the Minister of Career Development, could he file in the House what report he gave the Department of Environment remarking upon the Dashawa environmental impact study?
If you'd like to put it on the order paper, Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to consider it.
I think I caught him with his lottery down, Mr. Speaker. But, the second question then is to the Attorney General. Certainly the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, who is in charge of the negotiating with the Lubicons in the area, must have had some input after the environmental impact study had been filed December the 15th. In that 6-week period, could the Attorney General inform the House what input he made on this project, and could he be able to file his report or his letters on that?
Mr. Speaker, I took part in discussions relative to this matter. The negotiations, of course, now being carried on, regrettably, are not directly with the Lubicon band because they refuse to negotiate with the province at this stage. We're hoping that will change. But the fact is that the negotiations have been carried on with the federal government and with two negotiators, one appointed by myself on behalf of the government in late fall of last year, and one by the federal government at just about the same time, prior to our appointment of the negotiator. Certainly the question of whether or not the land associated with the Lubicon claim would in any way be impacted upon by the Dashawa project was reviewed by my colleague, the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife, and that was made known and thoroughly assessed in the process.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon, the first two questions really are somewhat of a violation of Beauchene 360 subsection 2. Limitations on questions may not seek information about matters which are in their nature secret, such as decisions or proceedings of Cabinet. So just a careful warning.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, maybe take it up later, this was not secret. This was a hearing in which the departments were invited to make their information. But obviously, all the gobbledygook from the Attorney General means that he wasn't consulted. At least if he was, they forgot it was so, he had such a great effect that they forgot all about it when they announced the project. This question then is to the Minister of Environment. Was the Minister of Environment aware that in his own files, in spite of when the Dashawa environmental impact study was filed, there is a report by a Dr. Hux in 1976 that says quite clearly that the Japanese experience in the 1960s said that the craft pulp method of dealing with making paper or making pulp caused deaths and abnormal illnesses in people with lung diseases. Was he aware that that report was in the files?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's probably in order to clarify for the member from Westlock Sturgeon just a little more fact with respect to this matter. Several days ago he raised an original question with it, and perhaps we should just clarify some of the dates in question. It was on October 19 of 1987 that we requested the Dashawa prepare and submit an environmental impact assessment. That came about after a series of discussions that occurred in 1987. That EIA report was submitted on December 18, and supporting appendices then were provided to us in January 4, 1988. I then referred Alberta Environment to various other agencies, the provincial government and, in fact, to the federal government, the environmental impact assessment. That environmental impact assessment report is currently under review. We recently requested in the first part of February additional information from Diashawa with respect to this project, and I think it should be very clear that we are ongoing, in an ongoing way, receiving additional information from Diashawa. We received no application for permits or licenses under the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act, although that we anticipate that they will be coming. But perhaps the most important aspect of all of this, Mr. Speaker, is that during 1987, when we discussed this matter with Diashawa, we insisted that we should have a new instrument, a new environmentally sound instrument called oxygen delignification attached to the Diashawa plant. And that eliminates the production and the usage of chlorine that the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon is talking about. The report he talks about, dated 1976, may very well have been current in 1976, but this is now March 1988. And I should point out that oxygen delignification has now become the methodology of usage in Diashawa. It's state-of-the-art, the most sophisticated to be found in the world.
Mr. Speaker, it may well be that the report's in 1976, but there has been no proof at all, Mr. Speaker, to show that the modern method supposedly is any different than the old one. So how can this minister say that there is no necessity for public hearings when Diashawa had no public hearings in the Lubicon area, and he himself has a report in his file saying that it's possible that pulmonary diseases would affect a band that has already been stricken with TB in the last year?
Mr. Speaker, this is March 1988. The report that the member is talking about is dated 1976. I took the advice last fall, Mr. Speaker. I took the advice last fall of the opposition in doing a little traveling, getting outside of Alberta. And one of those trips took me to Germany, where I had a great opportunity to meet with federal environmental officials in Germany, and who had indirect consultations with the people of Sweden. And as you'll recall, a year ago, members of at least one of the opposition parties said, Kowalski, get out of here, go to Europe, find out what's going on. Well, I did it. And I came back, and I'm very, very confident in my mind that the new methodologies that are being used, state-of-the-art equipment being used in various parts of the world, will provide oxygen delignification equipment, not only for us at Diashawa, but we've also been very successful in negotiating that for the new Champion expansion. And there's no question in my mind that this is the best equipment that is currently available in the world, and that can be tested by the member from Westlock Sturgeon. Mr. Speaker, it's erroneous, I suppose, that the member from Westlock Sturgeon is once again saying, why were there no public meetings at the Diashawa site? The Diashawa site is 16 kilometers away from Peace River, or nearly 10 miles away from Peace River. If the member from Westlock Sturgeon is unhappy that a meeting was not held in the Diashawa site, that has nothing there. There's not a room, not a hotel, not a motel, not a meeting hall. It seems strange to me that the big issue today is having the meeting 10 miles away.
Order.
Additional supplementaries on this question. The member for Edmonton Highlands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think one issue has been seriously overlooked here, and that is that the government has obviously known for nearly 50 years that some of the lands might be considered natural lands by the Lubicon. Can the Attorney General please explain why it is that he didn't have somebody in his department, once he got wind of the whole plant, the notion of it and plans for it, why he didn't get somebody to pick up the phone and phone the band to talk to them about it?
Because they weren't going to be on it.
Mr. Speaker, the regrettable fact, and I mentioned this earlier, is up until the initiative that was undertaken by our Premier relative to a direct contact with the Chief, is that the band has been refusing to discuss with the government of Alberta the subject of negotiating their claim. And the chatter that goes on across the way is indicative of the attention that's being paid to this matter in a serious way by the opposition parties. That's regrettable, but nonetheless, I will, well, that's fine. If you don't want to listen, I'll sit down.
Nevertheless, throughout both Friday and today, all honourable members might think in terms of looking at Standing Order 13, subsection 4, to be kind of useful. Supplementary or main question, Leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by the member for Lloydminster. Grand Prairie, rather, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. A group in Canada based out of Ottawa and possibly Western Canada called the Agricultural International Development Associates of Canada want to buy land in Western Canada and supposedly assist our farming enterprises here in the West. I would like to ask the Minister, is the Minister aware of this company? And if so, will the company share in the equity financing proposals that are being contemplated by the Minister as indicated on page 12 of Hansard Friday last?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm aware of the group. They came in to see me last summer, and I listened politely, as I do to all citizens who come to my office. If you want, you're lucky I have to give a government opinion, because if I gave a personal one of the former Minister of Agriculture, it would not be allowed to be printed in Hansard. But no, we're certainly willing to look at all positive suggestions which would assist Alberta farmers in their financial situations, but in terms of the equity opportunities that I mentioned on page 12 of Hansard, we're looking at Alberta opportunities.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate whether the funding for this organization is coming partly from government, and is there any intention of the Government of Alberta to become involved with them in terms of direct loans, or in terms of making ADC land, which is now in the hands of the Alberta Agricultural Development Corporation, available to them for purchase?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate whether she is aware of the funding for this group? Is it Canadian funding or is it international funding?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, could the Minister indicate whether this company is establishing in Alberta and have been given, that they have given notice to the Minister that they will establish here and want the cooperation of the Government of Alberta?
The company indicated that they were going to establish in Canada, and we're looking at Alberta as a positive opportunity. One of the reasons that a number of companies are looking at equity financing, Mr. Speaker, is because of Black Friday. Private investment is now interested in agricultural land. Over the long term, agricultural land has been a solid investment. It reduces inflationary risk, and there are a number of business people interested in agricultural investment in this province.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, supplementary back to the provincial treasurer. Yesterday, I guess I didn't ask the question clear enough, Mr. Speaker, and the treasurer slipped out the back door on me. It was with respect whether the provincial treasurer, in view of the options that the report suggested of financing and vendor financing, whether the provincial treasurer is contemplating changing the income tax rules in such a way that interest derived from money by investors in agricultural funding will get a better tax rate than interest derived from other type of loans.
Mr. Speaker, the same answers I gave on Friday is no.
Vegreville, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, to the Associate Minister, in view of the several hundred quarter sections of land that the ADC now holds title to, can she give this House and Albertans the assurance that the government will not entertain efforts from groups as outlined by the member for Little Bow and sell large portions of that land to single interests like private land bank or corporate interests.
Mr. Speaker, the ADC Development Corporation holds around 800 quarters of land, which is made up of about 300 parcels, i.e. farms. And we would not anticipate selling that land to one or two individual operators. We expect that land to move back into the agricultural sector, and it's moving on a regular basis, and that's part of the instructions that I had from caucus in terms of dealing with the options and opportunities report.
Member for Grand Prairie, followed by the member for St. Albert, then Edmonton Meadowlark, Clover Bar, Lloydminster, Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. In view of the recent attention that's been brought to the topic of dioxins in rivers in North America, wondering if the Minister would give us an indication of the status of dioxin pollution in the rivers in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about tracing something that's very, very difficult to trace. And I can't at the moment conclusively say, I cannot conclusively say that there are dioxins in the waterways of our province, nor can I conclusively say that there are not dioxins in the waterways of our province. What we've been doing and what we initiated last year in 1987 with all of the ministers of the environment in the country of Canada, and members will recall that I tabled a document in the legislature called the Dioxins, the Canadian Perspective, is attempting to find an international protocol that would basically allow us to identify a proportionate amount of dioxins in any particular volume. We're looking for a very, very minute trace, usually 1 part per quadrillion, and 1 part per quadrillion would be a 1 and 15 zeros after it. Or to give yourself an equivalency, Mr. Speaker, it'd be roughly trying to find a dollar bill someplace in the area of Canada. And there is not a conclusive, internationally sound or recognized protocol that we can use to measure. Now, notwithstanding that, there are some instruments that are available, and we can get some tentative results from it, and we're in the process of getting such information. But even when we do, there's some debate whether or not we'll really know what it means.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Would this imply then, Mr. Speaker, that we don't have a way of checking what's happening at the dioxins, say, downstream from the river, from existing pulp mills such as the one we have in Grand Prairie?
No, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't. Last fall, we took 24 water samples, and we have the water samples located in Alberta Environment's department, with just a block or two away. And before too long, I'll be sending some of these samples to Wright State University in Ohio, where there is a basis in terms of defining some type of criteria to identify what a dioxin is or what the level of it is. Recently, the government of Saskatchewan took some fish samples and made a statement. The Minister of the Environment recently in Saskatchewan issued a statement that basically said that in the results of their analysis of fish collected from the North Saskatchewan River near Prince Albert, that there is not a health hazard with respect to dioxins. It's, in addition to that, we're actively pursuing a definition or a standard or an international protocol so that when we do have the samples evaluated, everybody will agree that the identification means something.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the department have any procedures then where they're negotiating with present pulp mills or the future pulp mills that have been announced with respect to what precautions might be taken?
Earlier in the question period, Mr. Speaker, I alluded to the fact in the existence of oxygen delignification equipment that's now in place with respect to the proposal for Diashawa. I also pointed out that in terms of the discussion with Champion at Hinton, that Champion, in terms of its expansion program, will introduce and put in as part of their plant oxygen delignification equipment. You recall that various members of the opposition were suggesting that we might deal with that last year. And those are basically the two plants that in essence would deal with that in the province. There's one other, and that's Procter & Gamble at Grand Prairie. Procter & Gamble currently does not have oxygen delignification equipment, but we would advise them when they come back to us for a license upgrading, then one of the items that we'll be putting on the table is the need for oxygen delignification equipment at Procter & Gamble. The estimate right now is that equipment might be as high as $45 million for the one plant, Procter & Gamble. And the other two plants and major firms that are currently underway, Miller Western and Alberta Newsprint in Whitecourt, will not use this because they're using chemi-thermomechanical pulping processes that doesn't use chlorine, and there are no dioxins formed as a result of it.
A final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister's Department have a strategy with other jurisdictions with respect to pollution problems with our water rivers flowing through our province or into and out of?
The only major river that flows into our province is the Peace River. All other rivers basically originate in the Rocky Mountains and flow out of our province. There is no interprovincial agreement in terms of water apportionment or water management on the Peace River. There never has been one, but in the last year we've begun negotiations with a pretty positive government now in British Columbia that is prepared to sit down with us and talk to us about an apportionment agreement. And hopefully, if all goes well, we'll be able to solve such an instrument within 2 years from now. Mr. Speaker, all other rivers, major rivers that flow through Alberta, flow out of Alberta, are governed by apportionment agreements with the provinces of Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Supplementary, Edmonton Gary.
Thank you. Considering that the Federal Environment Department got results back in 6 days on samples they took in BC, could the minister guarantee that he will have some results back from the samples he took last fall, and that he will do an EIA that includes a risk assessment of dioxin danger before he permits the go-ahead of the Daishawa plant?
Mr. Speaker, there's no doubt at all about the ability to get back a result from testing for dioxins. The difficulty is that the scientific community still has not agreed on what the protocol is or what the definition means. So on the one hand, you can get a result back, but if two different scientists disagree with it, is it 1 part per quadrillion, which is 1 part out of 1 with 15 zeros behind it, and somebody else says, well, no, that's dangerous, but you could have 20 parts per quadrillion. I can't even understand what a million is, never mind a quadrillion. And I think it's extremely important, that all of us have a definition that the scientific community will agree to. Is it important if it's 20 parts per quadrillion, or is it important if it's 30 parts per quadrillion? Because the last thing in the world that we want to have is a nonsensical debate with two people arguing about what it really means. We want to make sure that we can protect our environment, but in order to do that, we have to have knowledge with respect to the matter.
Member for St. Albert, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today, the initial one at least, goes to the Premier. In view of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the construction industry has had an absence of collective agreements for almost 4.5 years now, and that this absence of collective agreements was created by a lack of decent labor legislation, specifically when it came to this government allowing for 25-hour lockouts, could the Premier tell us whether or not he supports what his Minister of Labour brought to this Assembly last year by way of Bill 53? Does the Premier and this government support the Minister of Labour's initiative in Bill 53 to re-establish collective agreements in the construction industry?
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the whole House passed the piece of legislation and obviously had our support.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Premier for his answer. It's been a lot better than what we've seen in this legislature past. In view of the fact, this is a supplementary to the Minister of Labour, in view of the fact that the Minister of Labour introduced Bill 53, could that Minister of Labour tell us why he has delayed the process of Bill 53 bargaining?
Mr. Speaker, I think the parties have delayed the progress.
Mr. Speaker, that simply isn't the case, and I'd like to ask a supplementary to the Minister of Labour. Why, when Bill 53 contains a disputes resolution tribunal, did you as a Minister of Labour in the province of Alberta move away from the process and appoint a disputes inquiry board rather than a disputes resolution tribunal under Bill 53?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member was present in the Alberta Room in Government House in the middle of last September when I addressed this issue with the two federations. At that time, I made perfectly clear to both federations what I had said previously. that the provisions in Bill 53, the Construction Industry Collective Bargaining Act, where it mentions the formation of the arbitration board, whatever you want to call it, that those provisions were not in any way intended to impose upon a major industry an agreement. Those provisions were included in the statute so that in the event of a small item in the general part of the agreement, or perhaps one of the smaller tables dealing with the subsidiary parts of an agreement, in the event that that was stopping all of the progress when the rest had been agreed to, that there was a way of settling the dispute and attaining the total agreement, the master agreement as it's called. That was made amply clear to both parties last September. I have repeated that on many occasions, and I am repeating it again today so that the honourable member will finally understand what was said to him some 6 months ago.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Minister of Labour. This minister has turned around and asked repeatedly from both bargaining federations why bargaining was stalemated. The minister got the answers. I have to ask for the minister is in his latest recommendation, when he directed the bargaining to recommence between the federations, why did he not put some specific guidelines in his recommendation to the parties to see some end point to the negotiation procedure under Bill 53?
Mr. Speaker, at a recent meeting in the same room, in the same building, I told both federations that I was very disappointed with the progress that had been made, and after all, it is the responsibility of those parties to negotiate a collective agreement. In some 6 months, very little of any use has been achieved. One has to remember that this legislation was developed in full consultation with both parties and with the construction owners. In other words, they have failed to utilize legislation that was produced with their close involvement to achieve collective agreements. I believe that part of the problem is the makeup of the federations, and for that reason, the primary responsibility of the Disputes Inquiry Board will be to develop recommendations to me on changes that should be made to those federations so that they will work better and that they will achieve a collective agreement. If they don't achieve all of it, if there are small items left over, then it is conceivable that arbitration will be used, but it will not be used to impose a total agreement upon the industry.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. The throne speech emphasized the government's commitment to providing small business with viable approaches to funding through AOC. How is this commitment consistent with AOC's paltry $1.3 million in venture capital support for small business last year?
Mr. Speaker, the number referred to by the honourable member from Meadowlark is for the startup year for AOC. And in the current year, that is the year ending March 31st, 1988, I fully expect that Alberta Opportunity Company will make available to Alberta companies between $10 and $15 million of venture capital. So they have responded very well to the request of the government to move from a provider of debt financing to one of providing creative financing.
Still not a very particularly significant amount in light of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to large business. Why is AOC putting so little emphasis on support for manufacturing enterprise, only $3.2 million in the last reported year?
Mr. Speaker, Alberta Opportunity Company does not control the applicants who approach them for financing. The corporation responds to the applications, and the year, in the past couple of years, the activity level of AOC has been very high, and the percentage of loans provided to companies based on the application numbers has been a good percentage. I don't get involved, Mr. Speaker, nor do any elected members in the work of the Alberta Opportunity Company. It functions under a board of directors of private citizens, business men and women from around the province who give direction to the administration, and I think that those private citizens have done a very good job in directing the activities of the Alberta Opportunity Company.
Why is AOC putting so little emphasis on support to new small businesses, only $4 million in the last reported year?
Mr. Speaker, all of us are aware of the tremendous importance of small business to our economy and aware of the number of jobs that are created by small business. In fact, during 1987, there were 17,000 new business incorporations in Alberta. The majority of them find their financing through banks and trust companies and through a variety of vehicles, Mr. Speaker, and not all choose to use government agencies. And the activity level of small business is very good in Alberta, and it continues to be the primary creator of jobs, and it continues to be the target area for the Department of Economic Development and Trade, the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, and the Department of Tourism in terms of our support to economic activity.
Granted that it is such an important part of our economic development, could the minister please explain how he finds acceptable that only 388 small business projects were supported by Alberta Opportunity Company last year?
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to finish this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, recently in speaking to and with a lot of small businessmen, the comments that I've received on the Small Business Term Assistance Program have been very positive. We provided initially $750 million to small businesses at 9%. And the take-up, as the honourable member would remember, was so great that we had to increase the amount to more than $1 billion. And the businesses that are talking to us say that the benefits of having 9% fixed rate financing over 10 years have been tremendous in their capacity to add employees and to expand their business. So there are other vehicles other than Alberta Opportunity Company in responding to the needs of Alberta small business.
Supplementary, Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister, can the Minister, in light of the fact we're speaking of venture capital, can the Minister indicate if the Alberta Small Business Equity Corporation program is going to continue and if it's going to be enhanced?
Mr. Speaker, the SBEC program has created over 350 pools of equity financing, and to date, those small investor pools have not completed their investments. We're monitoring it very closely, and should a new program appear to be beneficial or a modified program require development, we're watching it very closely. We're also looking at other ways of improving access to seed capital, and that activity is going on in cooperation with a number of departments in government.
Supplementary, Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, the minister was asked about $67 million in loans and loan guarantees to one company, that being Gainers. I wonder if the minister could estimate for the legislature how many small businesses could have been helped and how many jobs created in Alberta by small business if they had had access to that $67 million.
Hypothetical.
Orders of the day.